Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith and you're watching another episode of Overbooked, the series where I talk about every single book on my shelves because if I don't pass this test, I'm going to be kicked out of the academy. Today we are talking about the Poppy War series by R.F. Kuang. Some quick disclaimers before we start. I'm pretty sure I had a review copy of all three of these, digital or physical. There was some variety. I honestly can't remember for the first one. I'm pretty sure I did. Regardless of where books come from, nobody's paying me to talk about books and all opinions are my own. I also want to mention that while I'm going to keep this free of major spoilers, I am going to talk about the trajectory of the series as a whole. So I would maybe suggest if you really want to avoid spoilers for book one, not watching this, instead go away, read book one, come back when you finished it, we can chat about it then. Because I think that it's important to acknowledge that book one is very different in theory from the other books in the series, so that's where I'm going with that. Also, some very hefty content warnings apply for all three books in this series. I really do urge you to look them up. I will plonk the story graph down in the comments below. Not in the comments, in the description. It's fine. The Poppy War is a fantasy series, the first book of which came out in 2018, followed by The Dragon Republic. This is an ARC copy. I will put up the cover, sorry Judith. That was in 2019, and The Burning God came out in 2020. They are an adult fantasy series set in a fantasy world inspired by China. I'm going to read you R.F. Kuang's bio because that's helpful. She's a Marshall Scholar, translator, and a Hugo, Nebula, Locus, and World Fantasy Award-nominated author of the Poppy War trilogy, and the forthcoming Babel. She has an MPhil in Chinese Studies from Cambridge and an MSc in Contemporary Chinese Studies from Oxford. She is now pursuing a PhD in East Asian Languages and Literatures at Yale. There we go. Very academic-y person. Doesn't surprise me based on where the first book starts. For plot summary, I've written, try your best, Judith. You got this. I'm going to endeavour to explain the vague concept of the Poppy War, which I should probably put behind me, but I feel like you know what it looks like. The Poppy War follows our main character, Rin, who grows up as a war orphan adopted by a not very nice family in the southern province of this world, basically. And this world has been various wars over time, various different types of wars, and thus the military is very important to it. Rin, to escape a very bad marriage, decides that she's going to try and test into the top military academy. And everyone can take this test, but it's basically a false hope for poor people. Anyway, Rin studies very hard, takes the test, passes, tests into the top academy. Military academy. That's the first half of the book, is Rin attends military academy, basically. Second half of the book is much more about war, and the other two books in the series, much more about war. If you don't want to read a military-focused series, I don't recommend picking these up. But put simply, we're following this main character who's a bit of a disaster in this scenario that is in itself a bit of a disaster, right? My first pro for this series is that it has magic and it has warfare. It isn't necessarily about magical warfare in a way that some other books are, but I think it's a really interesting examination of how magic would function in war, especially if that magic is a sort of a dying art, I suppose. And I'm saying magic as a bit of a catch-all term for what's going on. It's not exactly right, it's a bit more religious-y than that, but that meeting of the old world and the new and different technological advances and the impact they have on warfare, that's all in there as well. A lot of it's about military strategy and basing your strategy around the skill sets that you have and such. I found it a really interesting look at war. I think possibly if I knew more about the historical influences on the book, I would have found that more interesting or impactful for myself. So perhaps that's something I can go into in the future. But for me, I was reading this in terms of like, I'm just taking this semi at face value that this is what I'm reading, and it's a very brutal look at war, but a very interesting one as well. I think that the first book in itself is a very solid book. I think it is definitely a book of two halves, but those two halves come together really well in that we have sort of the theory and the background to why decisions are made the way they are in the second half, and I found that really interesting. We'll come on to why I don't think that works as well in the later books when we get to the cons section. But if you want just one book that I think is very good, it doesn't necessarily round itself off in a way that you might want if you wanted to read the whole trilogy, but I think you can read book one and just go, that was great, I don't think I need to continue. My personal opinion is you could do that. And I really like the characters. I think this series has a lot of really good supporting characters, because quite often, I don't know if anyone else felt the same way who's read this, I found Rin quite irritating. And again, we'll come on to that later. I still think she's a very interesting character, I still think she's worth reading, but I don't like her most of the book. Like, I don't think you're meant to like Rin in the same way as you like other characters in different series. There are a lot of different side characters, a lot of whom are very complicated people. There's a lot of people that I would read novellas about their lives. I just want to know how they're doing, that kind of thing. And I like a book that makes me root for the side characters. I really enjoy that. I've mentioned that I don't know a lot about the historical allegories in this series, and that's something I would really like to change for myself, and I think I'm working towards it. Me picking up a history book after my degree, it doesn't happen very often, but I am working on it. But I think if you do want this kind of fantasy book that's rooted in something historical, which I've read a number of them and I really do enjoy them, I think this is a good example of that, and I think it could send you down some good research rabbit holes, which you know I love. Here we come on to the issue at hand, because book 1 is really good. It's one of my favourite books. I think it's just a fantastic read if you're willing to accept all of the kind of brutal elements of it, right? Book 2 and 3, they do go downhill, in my opinion. You may feel differently. In my opinion, having reread them all for this video, they go downhill. And my reasoning for why, this is going to be minor spoilers, very, very minor. So as I say, click away if you don't want to know. But I found that Rin, who is set up in book 1 to be an incredibly clever person, even if that cleverness is just, I'm very good at passing exams, we still get elements of she's a good strategist. She is willing to make tough choices based on her own intuition and see them play out. She is brutal but not stupid. And book 2 and 3, I think, spends a lot of time on Rin being backstabbed and manipulated by people and things going wrong, and Rin kind of being stood there like, how could this have happened? How could I have foreseen that this would go terribly wrong for me when I'm just barging in? And I think you can read that as intentional, particularly in book 2 when we're dealing with some substance abuse kind of stuff. Book 2, maybe. But it really felt like we lost that initial character. And again, could be intentional, could be read very much as this is the consequences of what went on in book 1, and actually that wisdom is meaningless in this situation. But for me, it really didn't make Rin likeable as a character, and it made me frustrated when the backstabbings and the manipulations and that everything went wrong, and it was just sort of there going, well, that went badly. Well, of course it did. You didn't think it through. You know, it felt less of a, there was nothing you could do, it was always going to be this way, and more of a, you could have avoided this if you just, thought about it for 5 minutes. Again, charitable reading, that's intentional, and definitely what's meant to be happening, and you should be annoyed at it because that's what the book wants you to do. Uncharitable reading, we lost some of the reasons that Rin was a likeable character in the first book, so why do I care about her now? I also think that the framework of the first book is really important as to why it works. Again, I mentioned that it's a book of 2 halves, and the second and third book don't have that, and I don't think there was a way of bringing that in terms of having the sort of lessons learned and then lessons implemented. I don't think that could have worked without telling the whole thing as half in school and half not, which would have been an absolute mess of a narrative structure. So I think that that's why book 1 works, and that's why book 2 and 3 didn't work as well for me, because you don't have that calling back to things, and that idea of your mentorship and everything sparking you into the person that you are now doesn't work as well in book 2 and 3, so it's less impactful. All that to say, I do think that if you like book 1, you will probably still have a decent time with book 2 and 3. And I think a lot of people not fell afoul of, because, we are who we are, but there was a lot of hype around book 2 and 3 that I think did them a disservice in that they kind of were at a height that could never be reached in people's minds, right? Myself included. I did actually enjoy book 3 the first time I read it. On a reread, it's a bit of a slog. I still think these are well worth reading. It's a really interesting series, and I'm really excited for how it's going to fit as a part of kind of R.F. Kuang's canon of work in the long term, right? This is, the Poppy War is where she's starting. Where are we going to go from here? And I'm really excited to read Babel and see what that's like, because I'm on a bit of a dark academia kick at the moment. So yeah, I think there is a lot of really positive stuff to be said about this series. I think that it's unfortunate that it does tail off in the way that it does. I'll be interested to see if I still feel the same way the next time I reread this series, which will probably be in a couple of years. And as I say, this is just my personal viewpoints. You might have read book 3 and absolutely loved it. I don't know what to tell you. Some comparisons, some other things you might want to read. For that, this is based in historical events, but we're putting a fantasy spin on it, and also an exploration of war and propaganda. Phoenix Extravagant by Yoon Ha Lee, I think, is a really great example of this. It sent me down such a research rabbit hole. I found it so interesting. I would recommend it. Another alternative history is She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. I really, really love this book, and I think it did what Rin doesn't quite manage to do in this book, and wrote a main character that I really, really liked. And maybe that's about personal preference for me, but I had a great time with that book. And last one that I wanted to mention that I have not yet finished is Sword of Kaigen. I'm going to link some reviews that other people have done for Sword of Kaigen down below, because I cannot comment on it yet, but it felt like something I ought to bring up in the kind of learning to fight with a sword, military stuff going on. And I've heard really good things about it, and I really do need to finish it. I've had a bookmark in 100 pages for quite some time. One day I'll finish Sword of Kaigen. My final thoughts. I had a good time rereading this series. I genuinely did. I think that the storyline is very good, and the third book in particular has some elements that I can see how, if a few different choices had been made, I would have had an excellent time with this series, and it would have all been a 5-star read, right? It's not that those choices therefore are bad choices, it's just not my preference. I think they're well worth reading. I don't think I've read anything that's like hit me in the same way, the exact same way. They don't feel like replications of anything else, and I'm excited to see what comes next. Babel's going to be a time. I think it's going to be a very, very different book though. So those are my thoughts, but please do hit me with your thoughts down in the comments below. I would love to know what you think, especially if you've only read a couple of these, or if you're nervous to start book 3, let me know what your feelings are down in the comments below. You can also recommend other things. I would love to know your recommendations, particularly for alternative history stuff. I love it. While you're down there commenting, if you haven't already, please do subscribe. It makes me feel loved and appreciated. You can also follow me on social media. Come hang out on Discord, where we have a wonderful time talking about books. I don't know what that was, but I did it anyway. Thank you to my patrons who appreciate all of this chaos that I provide and support the channel. That's all linked below if you would like to join their number. Thank you so much for watching. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next one.